Lakota Life. Echoes of our ancestors. Long before others learned their name, the people knew who they were. They did not think of themselves as a nation in the way others would later define nations. They called themselves the people. The word carried no borders and required no marks on stone. It named those who lived side by side, who moved with one another, who remembered together. Fire was shared at night. The work of the day belonged to many hands. Stories found their way into the ears of children, and prayers traveled with the first breath of morning. Around the year 1700, their world felt wide and alive. Land was not something a person claimed. It stood as relation. Rivers held memory along their bends. Trees offered shelter without asking for thanks. Animals moved with intent through known paths. Wind carried voices from far places, and people learned to listen with patience as much as with their ears. Living well came from learning the ways of this place, rather than pressing against them. A hunter paused before crossing open ground. Someone tested the river's edge with a staff before stepping forward. The land answered when attention was given. Season guided movement. When warmth returned, camps formed near rivers and the edges of trees where water stayed close, and game moved through familiar routes. Lodges rose in patterns shaped by memory more than rule. Paths between families followed lines worn smooth by years of passing feet. Children learned where the ground softened by the stream, where berries ripened under late sun, and where trees opened into grass. These things were not learned through long instruction. They came through walking behind those who knew the way, through small missteps, through standing again after a fall. Cold months changed the rhythm of life. People drew closer. Fires burned longer into the dark. Voices lingered at night. Elders spoke more often then, not to command attention, but because winter taught what could not be wasted and showed what must be shared. Scarcity sharpened memory. It reminded the camp that life continued through care rather than habit. Food entered the lodge through restraint. Hunting and gathering followed attention to sign and season. What was brought back served many uses. What remained in the field was acknowledged rather than ignored. Even small birds carried breath from the same mystery that sustained the people, taking without need unsettled balance and carried consequence beyond the moment. Balance lived as practice. From early childhood, people learned the shape of giving and receiving. A hunter's return mattered beyond his own lodge. A woman's gathering was measured by who would eat that night. Children belonged to more than two parents. Many eyes watched them grow. Correction came quietly. Praise followed effort. No one stood apart from the circle of care. Each life carried what came before and pointed toward what followed. Names reflected this. A child might be called by a simple name at birth, shaped by a season or a sign. Deeper names emerged as character took shape through action and regard. Such names arrived through recognition rather than choosing. Being named meant being seen by the people. Elders held authority without crowns. Their standing came from long attention to what endured and what faded. Hunger and plenty had both moved through their lives. Loss and return shaped memory. Storms scattered camps. Calm drew people back together. When elders spoke, others listened, because experience had already carried them through what the young had yet to face. Prayer did not wait for ceremony. It moved through daily life. The first breath of dawn carried it. The pause before a hunt held it. Care found expression in the placing of a bowl near the fire and in the quiet thanks after food was shared. Spirit did not stand apart from earth or sky. Breath joined animals and people to the same living presence. Smoke lifted from evening fires and thinned into open air. This way of seeing shaped daily choices. Care for land followed from it. Respect for elders grew within it. Children learned their place through it. Walking in a good way did not promise ease. It offered direction. Hardship visited the camp. Sickness took children in harsh seasons. Storms tore at lodges. Hunts failed. Fires burned low in lean winters. Grief entered as surely as joy did. Nothing about loss was hidden. Sorrow moved through the camp and found room among others. The world had not turned against them. Life required endurance, and endurance grew through shared burden. Time did not move by numbers. Herds crossing open ground marked its passing. Grass bending under wind carried its measure. River ice giving way to thaw told its own story. Memory held events through births, losses, and returns. Days passed through living rather than counting. Beyond their lands, change had already begun. Far to the south and east, strangers crossed waters unseen by these camps. Goods traveled long trails through many hands. Stories and warnings followed. The ripple of distant movement edged closer, though few yet felt its weight. Old ways still stood strong, even as the margins of that world began to shift. Rumors of unfamiliar animals reached some camps. These creatures carried people faster than feet could travel. Stories of them arrived unevenly and without certainty. For now, people walked as they always had. Rivers guided their movement. Herds shaped their paths. Knowledge followed the lines set by those who had gone before. Evening gathered the people toward the fire. Light softened across the ground. Stories rose into the smoke. The tales spoke of becoming rather than conquest, of humility learned through error, of courage that did not boast. Women who held families together through long winters remained present in memory. Men who learned that strength showed itself through giving shaped the lessons carried forward. Story served remembrance. Without memory, direction thins. Knowing how a people came to be clarifies where they might go. Each telling kept the larger story intact. Remembrance held the community together. Lives found their place within something wider. Solitude did not mean isolation. Meaning lived in land for those willing to move slowly enough to notice. Before the great changes arrived, balance shaped daily life. Land, kinship, and breath formed steady ground. Storms beyond the horizon remained unknown. What lay ahead could not yet be measured. The world they had been given still taught them how to live within it. This knowledge carried weight. Children grew up learning respect. Elders were honored for the memory they carried. Gratitude shaped the beginning of each day. Our story begins in that world. Not a place of legend, not a place of perfect harmony. A world shaped by real lives, held together through relationship with land and with one another. Their voices did not vanish. They live on in the shape of rivers, in paths worn into the earth by generations of feet. And in the way, stories find their way into night, when the fire burns low and wind moves through the trees. The echoes of those lives still move through this land. Careful listening can still find them. Movement shaped how the people understood distance. Trails did not appear as lines drawn for direction. They formed through use, through return, through the steady passing of seasons. A bend in the river marked where camps had settled before. A stand of trees held the quiet of winter shelters long gone. The people did not travel to claim these places. They returned because memory and survival had already shaped them. Kinship ordered the camp. Families gathered in patterns shaped by trust and shared work. Close relations kept their lodges within easy reach. Older relatives stayed near those who needed guidance. Young children moved between fires under many watchful eyes. Care spread outward from each household until it reached the edges of camp. No single lodge carried its burden alone. Work followed these same lines of connection. Tasks shifted with season and need. Some set out to hunt. Others prepared hides, repaired tools, gathered wood, or kept the daily rhythm of camp moving. Children followed where they were allowed, learning through presence rather than instruction. Small errors found gentle correction. Confidence grew through repetition and patience. Skill took shape over time. Leadership showed itself through conduct. Those who spoke well but acted poorly did not hold influence for long. Trust gathered around people who carried responsibility with steadiness. Decisions grew from listening as much as from speaking. When disputes arose, they were addressed among those affected. Harmony did not mean the absence of conflict. It meant the willingness to restore balance after it had been disturbed. Women carried knowledge that shaped survival. They knew where roots grew strong and where berries ripened first. They understood how hides must be worked so they would hold against cold. Much of camp life followed the rhythm of their hands. Children learned earliest lessons from women who taught through example, patience, and steady care. This work did not stand behind the work of men. It formed the structure that allowed the camp to endure. Smoke curled from low fires as hides were worked into shape. Men learned that strength required restraint. Hunting demanded attention to sign and movement. A careless step scattered game. A rushed strike wasted effort. Success came through waiting, through reading the land, through moving with purpose. Returning with meat carried responsibility as well as praise. Distribution mattered. A lodge filled while others went hungry revealed a failure of character rather than a victory. Children absorbed these patterns before they could name them. They noticed how food moved through camp. They watched who listened before speaking. They learned whose presence calmed a gathering and whose words unsettled it. Instruction came through lived example. Correction followed through relationship rather than command. Ceremony marked transitions. Important moments called people together. The arrival of a child, the return of hunters, the passing of an elder brought attention from the community. The sacred pipe carried prayers shared among many. Songs held what words could not carry alone. These moments clarified life rather than interrupting it. Learning traveled through story. Evenings offered time for memory to move across generations. Tales of journeys taken, of choices made, of outcomes endured settled into young minds. Direction lived within these stories more than spectacle. Each telling offered another way of seeing the world. The land itself offered instruction. Wind taught when to move and when to wait. River ice revealed when crossings were safe. The behavior of animals signaled change before it showed in the sky. Those who paid attention traveled with fewer losses. Those who ignored such signs learned through hardship. Trade connected distant peoples. Goods passed between nations along trails older than any single camp. Stone, hides, tools, and knowledge moved from hand to hand. Stories traveled with them. Warnings did as well. These exchanges did not erase difference. They revealed how many ways people learned to live within the same world. Encounters with other nations required care. Boundaries were understood through memory and agreement, rather than marks on land. Tensions rose when needs pressed close. Peace held when respect guided movement. Alliances formed through marriage, trade, and shared defense. Conflict arrived when those bonds failed or were tested by scarcity. Change approached without noise. New tools appeared at the edges of exchange. Unfamiliar goods entered camp through routes that reached beyond the horizon. Some items proved useful. Others unsettled long-held rhythms. The people weighed these changes without haste. Adoption followed need rather than novelty. News traveled slowly, though it traveled far. A story told in one place took seasons to reach another. By the time it arrived, the world it described had already shifted. Memory adjusted. Understanding remained flexible. What mattered most stayed close to home. Land beneath one's feet, people beside the fire, the work waiting at dawn. Continuity did not mean stillness. The people adapted when the world required it. They held fast when change threatened balance. Their ways had endured through seasons of scarcity and abundance. Adjustment came through attention rather than sudden turn. At the heart of this world stood relationship. Land shaped movement. Kinship shaped responsibility. Story shaped understanding. Breath tied each person to the living world around them. None of this required naming to be known. It lived in daily practice. This is the ground from which a family will step forward. Their lives will grow from the same rhythms that shaped the camp, from the same attention that guided movement, from the same care that ordered relationships. The echoes of that world remain close to the surface of this land. Listening still finds them in wind moving through tall grass, in water sliding past familiar stones, in the quiet current of stories passed from one voice to the next. The places the people favored carried familiar markers. River bends showed where camps could settle without struggle. High ground near water offered safety when levels rose. Groves broke the wind. Open stretches allowed for watchful eyes. Over time, these places became known through memory tied to what had happened there. Movement followed such memory as surely as it followed the shape of the land. Travel required attention to small signs. Tracks in soft earth showed recent passage. Broken stems along a trail revealed where people or game had moved. The color of the sky at dusk hinted at weather to come. Those who learned to read these signs crossed with fewer losses. Mistakes taught their own lessons. Survival sharpened observation. Knowledge passed through daily practice. Young people learned to carry water without spilling. They learned to place wood so fire would take hold. They learned which plants harmed and which healed. Each task carried patience within it. Correction offered direction. Instruction did not arrive as lecture. It emerged through shared work and quiet demonstration. A child's hands learned the weight of a full bucket before they learned its value. The rhythm of camp life taught order without command. Morning brought preparation. Daylight carried work across open ground and shaded edges alike. Evening drew people inward. Night returned the world to listening. Within this cycle, roles shifted with need. No task remained fixed to one pair of hands. Cooperation filled the spaces where strength alone could not reach. The people understood danger without dramatizing it. Storms gathered without warning. Illness moved through camp in harsh seasons. Animals turned when startled. Careful attention reduced risk. Overconfidence invited harm. Courage showed itself through measured action rather than display. Conflict found resolution through relationship. Disagreement arose where needs pressed close. Voices carried feeling. Elders guided conversation toward repair rather than victory. The aim lay in restoring balance. Harmony returned through willingness to hear what had been said and to release what no longer served the group. Spiritual life remained woven into ordinary movement. The sacred pipe passed through hands when prayer was shared. Songs carried gratitude, sorrow, and hope. Certain places held weight, because memory had gathered there over time. None of this removed people from daily work. It clarified why the work mattered. Seasonal movement stretched outward. Stories of broader plains reached the camps. Herds moved in greater number beyond wooded edges. Some families traveled farther during certain seasons, returning with accounts of open land and different rhythms of life. These journeys tested old ways against wider space, without abandoning them. The world expanded without urgency. New routes appeared along old trails. Encounters with distant nations brought unfamiliar customs into view. Curiosity met caution. What proved useful found a place. What unsettled balance remained at the edges of practice. Change was measured by fit with daily life rather than novelty. Unfamiliar goods signaled wider movement. Metal tools entered trade networks. Cloth appeared among exchanged items. These objects carried stories of distant origin. Use followed need. The camp absorbed what strengthened daily life and set aside what complicated it. Listening remained a skill to be learned. The land spoke through patterns of growth and scarcity. Elders spoke through memory shaped by years of watching cycles repeat. Children learned to attend to both. Paying attention reduced error. Ignoring such cues carried cost. The future pressed gently at the margins of the present. Signs of broader change gathered beyond the horizon. The people sensed movement in the world without yet knowing its shape. Their lives continued within familiar patterns. Camps rose. Work continued. Stories found new voices. Continuity lived in the ground beneath their feet. Paths worn by earlier generations remained visible. Places where fires once burned still offered shelter. River crossings carried memory of careful passage. The land remembered what people had done upon it. From this continuity, particular lives would soon emerge. They would be shaped by camp rhythms, by knowledge carried through daily work, by relationships that taught responsibility and care. Their choices would grow from the world that raised them. The family at the heart of this story comes from this ground. Their beginnings do not stand apart from the people around them. Their lives grow from the same rhythms that shaped the camp, from the same attention that guided movement, from the same respect that ordered relationships. These lives will carry forward what has endured. Traces of that endurance remain near the surface of this land. Careful listening still finds it in river bends, in the shelter of groves, and in the quiet return of people to places that once held their fires. The world the people knew did not stand still. Season by season, small changes gathered at the edges of daily life. New tools entered through trade. Stories arrived from distant places. Routes extended beyond familiar bends in the river. None of this erased what had come before. It added weight to decisions already shaped by care and memory. Adaptation had long shaped survival. The people adjusted to drought and abundance alike. Movement followed need. Camps shifted when the land asked for rest. Families returned to places that had sustained them before. Change moved through the same channels that carried tradition forward. Attention to balance guided choice. When new ways pressed against old patterns, people measured what strengthened daily life and what weakened it. The question was not whether something felt new, but whether it fit within responsibilities already carried. This way of choosing preserved coherence across generations. Community endured through such choices. Kinship continued to order care. Elders guided memory. Children learned by watching those who walked ahead of them. The fire remained the center of evening gathering. Stories offered direction rather than spectacle. These things held without depending on isolation from the wider world. Land anchored movement. Rivers marked return. Groves offered shelter. Open ground revealed the presence of herds. These features did not shift with rumor or novelty. They offered steadiness as the broader world grew more complex. A crossing used year after year kept its place in memory, even as paths beyond it changed. The people carried forward more than tools and customs. They carried ways of seeing. They carried attention to relationship. They carried habits of repair when balance broke. These elements traveled within families and between them, shaping choices as circumstances shifted. From this ground, lives unfolded. Children grew into responsibility. Young adults learned the weight of providing for others. Elders released tasks to those ready to carry them. Each change marked continuity rather than replacement. The thread between generations remained unbroken. The story that follows begins within this living continuity. A family will take shape within these rhythms. Their choices will reflect values carried by those around them. Joy and trial will grow from the same ground that shaped many lives before theirs. This is not a tale of disappearance. It is the beginning of a lineage within a people who endure. The world around them will change in ways they cannot yet imagine. Their ways of living will be tested. Their paths will stretch beyond familiar edges. Through all of this, the ground of relationship remains. What endures finds expression through ordinary lives. Care for one another. Attention to the land. Responsibility carried forward. These elements persist not because they resist change, but because they adapt without losing their center. The echoes of those who came before remain present. They move through the land where rivers return to familiar bends. They pass through hands preparing fire and shelter. They travel through stories shaped by memory and offered to those still learning how to listen. From these echoes, new lives rise. From those lives, new echoes follow. This is where the story opens.